So I have here the honor to introduce this distinguished panelist. First and foremost, you already heard from him, Mike Kanovitz, leading civil rights trial attorney. Mike? Exactly. We then have Daniel Keller, CEO of Influx Technologies. And then we have Colin Hart, crypto-native Web3 professional, a co-founder of the Eclipse Gaming subnet. So, I don't know about you, but I feel that this conference has started a little bit slow. I want to create a little bit of excitement. I want to be a little bit provocative. Yeah? All right. So, I would like to start the panel by first, very professionally, very smoothly, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves, and I would like them to talk about what is their relationship with digital asset. We already saw a great taxonomy from Mike in one of his previous slides. I would like the panelists to elaborate a little bit more. But then, that's, I think, the spicy part, is that as we were preparing for this panel, we had a meeting, and already in this meeting, we started to identify some dynamics. I want to bring up those dynamics as we go into the discussion. So, Mike, I know that you already introduced yourself, but please, very briefly, if you can introduce yourself and explain a little bit more, again, the relationship between you, your company, your business, and digital assets.
Son? Yeah. I'm an attorney. I practice civil rights litigation, which helps me understand the ins and outs of governments, and also consumer protection, which is what brought me to crypto, because we started a practice to try to help victims of fraud. And it was the journey of hearing the stories of people who had lost, many of them lost their life savings, and who really couldn't do anything about it, even though they had their rights, that led me and my law firm to start working on the problem with some blockchain engineers to try to figure out ways to create both a method for courts to connect to blockchains and a method that preserved all of the protocols and preserved decentralization. And that is what resulted in my company, Jurat, and that's what we're always involved in building.
Thank you, Mike. Daniel.
I am Dan Keller. I am the CEO for Influx Technologies, the co-founder of Flux, which is the world's first decentralized, truly decentralized compute network. We've got 14,000 nodes running globally by decentralized systems administrators. You think Bitcoin nodes, but actually as an enterprise, completely decentralized. The other question I have is, I wanted to find out if my Liberland application was approved yet. I don't know where they're at, but they had me at taxation as theft. I am a decentralization maximalist, and that gave us a little bit of spiciness in our prep conversation, because my question was always why. Why do we have to do it that way? So I'm really looking forward to this panel, and I think that as we continue to build on blockchain technology, we have to understand that at its root base, it needs to be decentralized. If you're running a blockchain project and AWS goes down, you're not decentralized. As a matter of fact, that's a huge issue. And one of the reasons why I joined GBA and decided to start coming to these events is I was starting to see this real bad trend in the industry, and that was the movement away from I call it the disruptors have disrupted the disruptors, because we as cypherpunks, as crypto enthusiasts, as blockchain enthusiasts, we're very excited to have this this platform to build on and grow. And along comes the federal government, and they start wanting to regulate everything. But the paradigm has shifted. The technology is iterating much too quickly for standard regulations as we've done in the past. If we're waiting on Congress to move on something, we're going to be well beyond that. So I'm starting to sound the alarm and saying we need to start looking at Web3, DePIN, and blockchain technologies, and we need to iterate quickly, because the U.S. will be passed by if we do not do something very quickly. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Daniel. Colin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Colin Hart. I'm one of the co-owners of ThorFi, building out the Eclipse Gaming blockchain. We are a gaming company focused on providing some of the best back-end infrastructure towards all gaming applications, whether it comes down from player-owned assets all the way into interoperability of in-game assets between different decentralized networks. We've been around since December of 2021, made it through as a bear market survivor, as one of the very few DeFi bear market survivors, and we're currently building and ushering in the next generation of Web3 gaming and interconnected network applications and back-end infrastructure.
Thank you very much, all of you. So let's start by introducing some of the concept vis-a-vis your respective point of view. So, Mike, you already made a very compelling presentation, but can you elaborate a little bit more about, so when a dispute occurs, today we have arbitration. What is that you are proposing in addition to or as an alternative to arbitration?
So arbitration, as most of you all know, is essentially taking a private person and making them the judge of your dispute. And we have that in our off-chain lives, and it's used for consumer disputes, it's used for business disputes. But it requires that the parties to the dispute enter into an agreement in advance. So much of human interactions don't involve a pre-existing agreement and therefore can't be susceptible to arbitration. When you drove here today, if you took the highway, you got in your car and you speeded this big chunk of metal up to 60 miles an hour and trusted that everybody driving around you is going to be careful and respect your right not to get hit. Well, underneath all of that trust is your knowledge that if they did something wrong, you could sue them. And they know that too, and people conform their behavior. So you need, in order to have a thriving ecosystem, you need both arbitration and you need compulsory dispute resolution, which is what happens in courts. Also, as we see from things like ransomware and fraud and theft, you need access to the criminal justice system, and the arbitrators don't provide that. One other issue with blockchain arbitration is it reintroduces the trust problem. If you are going to have an arbitrator decide your dispute and be able to enforce it, you have to have entrusted that arbitrator with the keys that will allow them to make that decision. That person becomes a point of failure. That person becomes, by and large, these are going to be trustworthy people, so you don't have to worry so much that they're going to cause you intermediary problems and run off with your assets. But all of that is basic to why we're using blockchain. And if instead we can create a layer for legal enforcement that preserves decentralization, yet gives everybody access to the court system, then we avoid reintroducing trust problems. And for solutions that need access to dispute resolution, for example, contracting in the real economy, we can provide that.
Thank you, Mike. So, to Daniel now. Before I ask you to address whether or not we need this issue about trust, verification of trust and verification of dispute, you mentioned some acronym before, DePIN. There are other acronyms, RWA. Can you please I'm sure everybody knows, but just in case, can you please articulate a little bit more this acronym, what is behind the concept, and then can you share your point of view vis-a-vis this concept of introducing a system of arbitration or dispute management?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing we really do well in the crypto and blockchain world is we create acronyms So, you know, whether it's DeFi, Web3, DePIN, RWA is the new buzzword, real world assets. But essentially what you boil down to, and Mike, I really respect your point of view, and you know, we dusted it up in our meeting before, which was great, and I did get a chance to research some. I think there's different flavors for blockchain across the board. Personally, I believe that blockchain should be trustless. I think that's the way that it was created. I think that's, we have in the standard tech stacks today, we have a trusted environment. You know who your cloud provider is, you know who your systems administrator is, so on and so forth. And I think we look at things, and by the way, the only person that I trust with my private keys is my dog, and he can't do anything with it. So, you know, I am a privacy maximalist, so to speak. And but I think we're in very interesting times, because I do believe this will be a multi-pronged attack. And I think that there will be interchain operability where people can opt into that process where you have a trusted environment and opt out. And we tend to put things under a lens here as our, you know, our regulation, our jurisdiction, and we talk about this in the US, but blockchain and cryptocurrency is global. I mean, Flux has 14,000 nodes globally. So you start having to think about this in a grander scheme, what this looks like globally. Well, we could trust. By the way, I don't trust, but we could trust our legal environment, our regulatory environment. But with that being said, that moves outside of the United States. So I think as this continues to grow, I think we have a ton of opportunity to kind of shift from being almost in a reactionary state with any technology that comes along. You know, how do you govern things today? What's mostly reactionary? We send a Wells notice, we send a cease and desist. We send with permissionless technology, that paradigm is out the window, and it will, as we learned earlier about the 1 million people working on cryptocurrency in the next several years, they're not going to ask for permission. They're just going to build it. And I think that's where we have to build these different flavors. You have to have a trusted environment, and perhaps that's where you're putting some RWAs and things like that, where you can control that and you can mitigate things. But I think blockchain as a whole needs to focus on the decentralized nature of what it made it great to begin with. We don't ask for permission, we just do it, and that's the awesome part of blockchain.
Thank you, Daniel. Colin, what's your point of view on this topic?
I mean, I absolutely fundamentally agree with you. I'm also a decentralized maxi myself. You know, I find it kind of interesting that the inspiration that caused the advent of Web3 technology and cryptocurrency as a whole was this concept of not needing to trust, the immutability of the infrastructure in the chains that we choose to transact on. The fact that we're having so many conversations now trying to interject a lot of this, you know, Web 2 mentality into a Web 3 environment, it just simply isn't applicable. And it's one of the major reasons why the vast majority of people who are predominantly in Web 3 left, you know, the traditional financial systems as a whole. So I think over time, we're going to have to come to a more resolute conclusion here. We're going to have to come to a more amicable solution between both governmental agencies and, you know, decentralized maxis like ourselves. Whether that comes down to, you know, essentially run finalizational layers on chains themselves in order to introduce that level of trust that we've been talking about from more of a layman side here, absolutely is a potential possibility. But the core infrastructure here in layer 1, layer 2s is permissionless, decentralized, and immutable in nature.
Thank you, Colin. First,
So,
please, Mike. Please,
thank you,
please,
thank you.
please.
We're not really very far apart, I think. Technologically, decentralization gets you a robust system where you don't have to worry about what the truth is. It's shared, everybody has the same view, and you can rely on the ledger. All of those aspects of decentralization can be preserved while still giving the government an ability to enforce its laws and giving individuals an ability to enforce their rights. Where I think we are bumping heads is whether the government should have a say-so on the blockchain, whether an individual's legal rights should trump the I'll use the term immutability here, but I'll explain in a second why that's not right, should trump the immutability of the blockchain. And in fact, we don't have to trump the immutability of the blockchain, but what we can do is we can, on a going forward basis, enter a new transaction that is remedial of a wrong that was previously committed and reflected in the ledger. So I think really what it comes down to is, should there be a say-so for legally remedial transactions?
If you would ask me, I'd say no, but I understand that it needs to be that way. I mean, ultimately, I think what you look at as we develop these technologies out, they continue to keep growing. That interchain operability plays into that as well, because I do think there does need to be different flavors. And let's face it, the worst words to ever hear is "we're from the government and we're here to help," because very rarely does help come from that. And sorry if I offended anyone, but that's just factually that's what we're looking at. So I think the entire concept of why blockchain was created, why Satoshi Nakamoto penned that white paper, was understanding that influence from any one centralized government would be negated. It would be the people's assets. And by the way, the taxi drivers hated Uber and Lyft, and they fought them all the way. And in the end, it became its own thing. Airbnb, the hotel industry hated it, and it became its own thing. I think in the end, I think there are points for both of those scenarios, but I'm just a maximalist about it. I just think that anytime you add government input in it, now granted, you have to understand your own rules and regulations where you live. I don't suggest anybody to break the law. However, sometimes we need to look at things and recraft these laws, have a constitutional resurgence where we start to look at how things move effectively. So that's just my point on it, I think.
Thank you, Daniel. Colin?
Yeah, I mean, my point really has to do with more of the logistics on actually how do we handle governmental institutions enforcing policy on decentralized blockchains, right? Which jurisdiction is happening for whatever event, right, that's happened. You may have a victim in the United States or in North America, and you may have a perpetrator out on the other side of the world under a completely different, framework of laws or monetary policies that they have to follow. So it becomes a logistical nightmare when we're talking about a, single country regulatory approach when we're dealing with a massively and intrinsically international chain application.
Yeah. Can I interject for a second? Because I want to step back for a second from government to industry best practices, to professional association. We are here at the GBA. The GBA was born fundamentally with its signature product, the blockchain maturity model. We are creating supplement, that we are advocating for assessment. So in this context that all of you are discussing, is there a room to demonstrate whether that trust, because I love that slide this morning from Brian, inherent trust, but there is also the concept of residual trust. There has to be something between the inherent trust of blockchain being a trust-building machine and how that building machine is actually being implemented and configured. Even if you go to bitcoin.org, they don't call the specification, but they have a reference. They have guidelines that the developer community of Bitcoin should follow in order to make sure that the Bitcoin function as expected. So what is your opinion vis-a-vis this point of view?
So we talk a lot about trust, and I think it makes sense from a layman looking in. Naturally, inherently, our industry is trustless. It's immutable in nature. You don't need to trust any foundation that's put out a chain. You can physically look at the actual code within that chain and understand whether or not that chain is upgradable over time or can be changed in the future. That's why Bitcoin has been seen as the predominant store of value. I like the idea of, different third-party, maybe NGOs coming together to form, ACE industry standards, best practices, being able to have that social accreditation and being able to vouch for certain builders in the space is very valuable. It just comes back down to an enforcement. Are we going to be able to have the international world all 8 billion people agree that the GMM model of the GBA here is going to be the predominant qualification mechanism for Web3 infrastructure as a whole, right? And I think we have to have a lot more time before we mature into understanding how that's going to look in a long-term perspective.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the number one way you lose trust in blockchain is you start manipulating the chain data. Yeah. And I mean, that's just factually. Why do we trust it so much? Why have each and every one of us invested in it? Is because we understand it is immutable. It is the finality. I think when you start messing with that, and by the way, we can look toward Russia right now. Russia 6 months ago was all about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. You know, it's the best thing since sliced bread. When they figured out they couldn't manipulate that chain data, they couldn't stop it. Now all of a sudden they want to ban it again.
What a surprise!
Yeah. So. And I do, and back to your question about, you know, best practice, I do believe best practices can be built, and I do believe you can integrate those into to pretty much anything. However, the U.S. is really doing a disservice to itself right now because it's not moving at the pace of the technology. My company is in the UK. Why is it in the UK? Because I can't have it in the US with clear regulatory guidelines. And it's a pain in the ass. I'm sorry. Excuse my language, but it is. So I had to pick up my company and move it to the UK, where I could get more regulatory guidance and more regulatory clarity. And we're systematically tied in to what this could be, rather than starting to look at it for face value and laying the foundational groundwork. And so I think we really need to start thinking of those things in two silos. What is best practices, industry best practices? If I want to build on Web3, what's the code that I use? If I want to do this, yes, those guidelines are there. But I also think there needs to be that autonomy that comes with the blockchain where it is immutable. And yes, there will be nefarious actors. We know it, we see it, right? We have this in the fiat system as well. Will it continue to grow in the crypto industry? Yes, until we get off our rear ends and we build some regulatory compliance to go with it.
Mike?
So I think certifications like BMM are absolutely vital. Ultimately, blockchain users are going to have a choice, and they're going to vote with their feet. And while it is true that anybody can read a smart contract and know for themselves, do I trust the smart contract? Anybody can read open source software and say, do I trust the protocols that this blockchain is using? Most people don't have the ability to do that.
Well, they won't have to, because AI is going to do that.
Well,
I'm 100. You're 100% right.
Yeah.
Right. The average layman can't read smart contracts. They can't read the Solidity code behind these behind this.
And that's why having a credential like BMM gives people the information they need in order to make good decisions. Like, I don't know when I get on a plane. I don't inspect it to make sure it's been put together correctly. I rely on the fact that it's got a certification from the FAA that says that it's airworthy, and I rely on the fact that there's ISO 9001 out there, so that the manufacturers all followed quality assurance standards when they created the part that went into the engine. And so blockchain doesn't have that yet. You know, we're still the wild, wild west. And an effort like BMM, which does bring standardization, and which it finally is gaining popularity and understanding and recognition in the community, can really help people who aren't blockchain native start making good choices about how they're going to incorporate blockchain technology into what they're doing.
Mike, you use the analogy of the airlines. Not a good analogy right now either. We had trust in Boeing a year ago, right? And they internally started to manipulate their processes, right? So that certification doesn't mean anything to them at this particular point. They're scrambling to take care of this. The trust has been lost in them. No matter what certifications you can give them, no matter what. So I do believe there needs to be some transparency, obviously, in blockchain, and there also needs to be some guardrails, so to speak. But I think, again, it goes back to that interchain operability. It's not a one-stop fixes everything. There will be multiple chains doing multiple things. I can only speak for Flux, but we do decentralized compute. Front ends, back ends, game servers, WordPress, AI, rendering, you name it. Our set of standards that we're going to use for what we're doing is going to be drastically different than what you're doing with your project, both of them valuable. And there could be a symbiotic relationship. We talked about this earlier, running node infrastructure on Flux, and all of a sudden now your project becomes more decentralized as well. And I think we start to really mature with that. But until we really get an understanding of the fundamental underpinnings of how we're going to do things moving forward, right? The smart people in the room sitting down and drafting those guidelines and how it's going to work. I don't think we're going to get there for a while.
Hopefully that's what BMM's accomplishing.
Colin?
I mean, I think these are the good first steps. And these first steps of being able to have some kind of accreditation board that's widely supported and widely adopted as a knowledge source or a credibility base in this industry is really important. I also think we naturally, as our blockchain infrastructure matures here, we have a natural evolution of interoperability. And I think that really starts to create a lot of these standards. When we look at an EVM framework, we can have a multitude of different layer 1, layer 2s that may all serve different purposes. For example, we're doing an Avalanche subnet that's focused directly on gaming. However, we have the ability to connect in with our own cross-chain messaging platforms EVM-wide, and we're able to ensure that the standards that the Eclipse blockchain is built on are the same standards that we've seen through the Ethereum Foundation and EVM bases as a technology basis as a whole.
Thank you. So we have 3 minutes left, 1 minute each for you. Daniel made reference to AI, and I wanted to broaden a little bit the scope here. I'm an old IT auditor, and I remember the saying, garbage in, garbage out. So how do you see the convergence of technology to make sure that in this decentralized, immutable ledger that we are creating, we believe in it, we are making sure that the input, what goes in, is actually accurate, is actually correct, is actually being validated?
That's the key to AI. The input models, basically, that's what you get for output models. Why do you think Microsoft was so excited to get ChatGPT? Elon went out and got his Grok, Google and Bard. They understand that the model that they place into that is going to be the output model. And they can manipulate that. And that's going to be a trust issue. And make no mistake, AI today is interesting. AI in 5 years is groundbreaking. And I think blockchain is a natural fit for that, because I truly believe for us to get to the Holy Land is an open sourced AI platform built on the blockchain, and the input models are by all of us. So, what does that look like on the other side? That looks like freedom. Because that is unfettered information in your hands that's not been manipulated or skewed one way or the other. The political parties, so on and so forth, it's factual. So I think the way we're looking at AI developing today is not the way we'll see it in 5 years. And I do believe we will have some awesome open source platforms, and people will be able to trust them. Will there be the conventional ones, the ChatGPTs and so on? Yes, there is. You can go and just same as fiat, you can go to the bank. Or you can use an open source platform, which is for the people by the people. So I think that's where we're headed.
Thank you, Daniel. Mike, and then Colin.
So let me disclaim any expertise whatsoever in AI. A little more than 5 years ago, I was talking to an AI engineer, and he said to me one of the most chilling things I've ever heard, which is he's just going to keep going until he replaces himself. And, I hope that that's not what our future looks like. I hope that the faculties the human beings have and uniquely bring remain relevant to all of our decisions, including things that happen on the blockchain. And, from my perspective and my particular profession, that's where it happens in courts. That's where we decide facts. That's where we get at truth that isn't digitally native. That's where we decide, was the light green or red, or we decide, was your constitutional rights violated? And so I certainly hope that we will be able to evolve blockchain along with the systems that have served us so well for millennia in upholding our increasingly complicated society.
Thank you, Mike. Colin?
I'm going to go really quickly. I see that we're almost out of time here. So I'll say my piece here really quickly. I see AI as the best way to, okay, just going on the overall thesis for this entire conference so far has been on the trust side of cryptocurrency as a whole. There's no better source of trust or framework of trust than a decentralized AI model that everybody has control over, right? When we're talking about validation of, different organizations to validate these different ideas or different chains, I personally would have a much easier time trusting something that's done through an automatic process rather than, a classic human attack vector that we've seen attacked and exploited multiple times throughout our history. So I think, AI is a fantastic way to supplement what we're already doing. It's a fantastic way to give more control, more ownership towards individuals. I don't think it's going to be something that necessarily replaces everything, though.
Thank you, guys. Please. Heather first, and then the gentleman behind.
Hi, thank you for the extraordinary panel. I would like to pile on a point that Mike was making a little bit and provide a counter argument for radical transparency and permanent, inalterable immutability. I would like to, for anyone in the room who is not a history buff, remember history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. There have been times throughout human history that registries have been used as systems of persecution, enablers of genocide. The administrative affiliation and processes behind great and enormous evil that all of us and our forebears fought and died to protect and preserve. What this means is that while I am also a maximalist for technological decentralization, we have to separate that thought from the governance of those systems. Though they're different ideas. And if you are radically advocating for technological decentralization as the first and only principle, you can deconstruct the very thing that we're all of these Western liberal ideas, the patriotic and libertarian feelings that we're all expressing, myself included. We could be dismantling those very systems, and those could all be used against us. So, sorry. Just feel passionately about the subject. Thanks for listening.
I think that's a great point. I'll just quickly say my opinion here on that. Yeah. At the end of the day, I think we already have ways to have a decentralized way that we're leading these chains, right? Not just from a technological side of it. They're called decentralized autonomous organizations. They're called DAOs. I think that is much better than the maintaining and trusting the existing structures, the same existing structures that really motivated us all to try to leave the traditional Web 2 financial systems. I don't want to make a repeat of what we've seen in the past, and as you're saying, history rhymes. I'd rather have the decision makers done from a historical perspective here, done through a decentralized framework rather than still relying on the same single points of attack vectors.
And I would just add into that as well. I mean, essentially, your name is on a list today. That's how things are ran today. There's nobody that's running around without their name on some list, but there's no anti-list, so to speak, and that's where blockchain really comes into play. I would rather trust an open ledger and my information being on a Bitcoin blockchain than my name being in a federal database, factually. So, and I do understand where you're coming from, and absolutely germane point. However, I think as technology continues to iterate and we continue to build on it, we need to redefine what that looks like long term. We need to think about the implications of what we're doing long term. I would rather take the risk personally myself. Now, that's not for everyone, but I would definitely take the risk personally myself rather than being on a government database. And factually, blockchain and cryptocurrency, Bitcoin was created to dethrone those lists.
So let me just jump in very quickly if I can. Heather, excellent points, and I want to talk to you about it afterwards. Eugene had his hands up, and I always want to hear what Eugene has to say, so can we get his question?
Anyone with a bow tie, we got to let them. You know what I'm saying?
One. Yeah, so I want to go back, Heather, to your point. There's a great answer to what you raised, and that lies in the technology. It's called zero-knowledge proofs. For example, we can prove that you voted and your vote has been properly tallied without knowing how. So no coercion, no bribery, leading to massive voter turnout increase. So let's use technology. Thank you.
Excellent point.
That's it? Thank you so much.
Thank
An
you.
Applause for the panel. Thank you, Brian.